And today's title is Metaphor in Local Architecture. Metaphor in Local Architecture. And we're starting with little definitions of architecture, which is paramount in how we see architecture today. Architecture is a way of seeing, thinking, and questioning our world. And also, it can also be defined as an expression of values, such that when we are talking about architecture, we are able to see it from different perspectives. And it is this perspective that we speak to today, such that we can see the metaphor in all the ramifications and as it applies to architecture. A teacher defined architecture as a discipline and practice shaped by the way we live and expressed through the design intelligence of the practitioner. So if we can define architecture as a way we live, it means that it must reflect the culture of the people, such that the product of architecture is a generally accepted product for the people. There's a popular maxim that says that the business of business is people. And if the business of business is people, it means that the business of architecture is a medium of expression. Architecture, then it can be argued that meaningful architecture can only come if it reflects the values of the people. Simply put, it is this participatory planning from local thoughts that we can discuss and also find the relevance in whatever and the Yoruba language that we will be using as a vehicle today is a means of communication. It is spoken widely in an estimated population of people going to about 40 million to 50 million speakers across the west coast of Africa, southwest Nigeria, and also extending to countries like Togo, Benin, and the rest. So we can spread language, and it can it's so spread out that the people involved are, as they occupy the southwest Nigeria, are a nation on their own. Their language comprises of proverbs and verses, odies, aphorisms, and language is the most important vehicle for people in this region. Going to the past, we can see that people in language are, excuse me, taking you through this other, on the next slide that I have is the unveiling of the past. We have seen in the European history around the 1900s up to the 1930s of how different schools of thought, different schools of thought from the German Bauhaus to the neoclassicism of the Dutch school, the expressionist architecture of the Germans, and this constructivism of the Soviets in the 1920s to the 1930s. We've seen how, going through history, they were able to use art. At some point, the German school embraced fine art and crafts. The Dutch school talked about styles, and the Soviet school of constructivism rejected art in favor of industrial age. But we can see how this panned out for the Chinese and the Indians. They developed their own concepts describing how they really want to apply external styles and concepts to what they are doing. The Indian virtue Sartre is an example of architectural science based on concept of harmony between man, nature, and the built environment. So we see in the Art Deco in France how they embrace visual art and architecture influence the design of everything from the building to the smallest utensils in the house. The same with the traditionalisms, the traditionalists. They rejected other styles, and the people can see that they were neither Greek nor Gothic. But later on in the 20th century, we saw the Japanese metabolism, how they even turned away from all this and they looked towards renewal and organic growth in Africa. But coming to Nigeria, which is a case in point for us, is the Nigerian case is there's a pre-colonial value. There's some that were abandoned. They embraced the Europeans, the Americans, and all the Brazilian influences that came in a mixed bag, so that there's no definite, no defined, no defined style, no defined identity, And as such, they were able to, they came out with almost what we call a conflicting style in a mixed bag. And up till today in the post-independence era, there's no definite style that we can articulate to this tribe. So going further, we can see that architecture has an history in Nigeria, and it is this history that we can see that its colorations have not really been really assimilated in the local realm in a way that will benefit local identity, so that we can see how they come out from these influences and move forward. Going forward, we can see that the Yoruba language, as I said before, is a case study for this, and using the population of people involved, we can see that they come up with their details of language, which is in proverbs, in their odys, and in the allegories, in the idioms that comes, in the description of the Yoruba language, and how they use it as a vehicle, as a compass for discourse. In the aphorisms that are all over the language, we can see it's an aphorism that dictates, that forms a compass for discourse in every society, in every discourse of the Yoruba society. And we see the aphorisms in this proverb, such that a close scrutiny helps us to see the metaphoric declaration there that defines the place and the significance that these things have in everyday life. Another one of those that shows there's a political system in place that is pre-colonial is the Idalu ni Ishelu Egun Longbowo de Loshobo. It's a way that we can see from the language that explains that these people are uniquely administered with their own policies. And this is how they are attached to their place before the advent of the colonials and the external influences that they have. So we can see from this aphorism that there's an emplacement or a sense of place in an aphorism that says, I'm speaking a lot of Yoruba today because even the pre-colonial influences that came with a foreign language that were interpreted. Their interrogations were not really taken down for Yoruba people to assimilate and sift out something that is good for them, to define themselves in a way to find out who the cap fits. The aphorisms from the European influences came in French, and it needs to be deconstructed, it needs to be reinterpreted before it can be applied at the local realm here. we can see from other aphorisms or way, as the Yorubas people will call it, is a concept that can address the current global issue on coronavirus, the COVID-19 issue. They already have this aphorism in place, but was later abandoned, for other external influences. Now, this presentation had gone to see the architectural aphorisms on the local realm. Those are language-based proverbs, language-based aphorisms that are in the language. It is used on everyday basis to show that there is a deep understanding of what it means to build, to have architectural meaning, and to also give meaning to how they construct their homes onto the neighborhoods, onto the city level. So listed on the slide that we have is Ile Longba Ogba, is Ogbaki Igbale, is an aphorism that puts the house in a context within a known ecosystem, so that there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. And putting it in that context, there is that understanding at the local level that one cannot supersede the other. They will rather be put together in a context that shows a deep understanding. So we can say that they have the Yoruba culture have a deep understanding of architecture, and as such, they are able to use it as daily language. Ilela Awokaso Somosolorúkọ is a language that depicts the house as a treasure store. Ile Labosimoko is an aphorism that shows that the house is a place of rest after every day's labor, and so on and so forth. So going forward, we can see that there has not been a deliberate attempt by the Yorubas to know themselves from their experience. How have they used those experiences and ideas to express who they are and where they want? He believes that the only way we can validate the correctness of ideas is in the sphere of experience. And it is in the sphere of experience that we see metaphor. Metaphor can be tested, it can be used, and it can be applied. But when we come back to metaphor, we see that metaphor itself is couched in language, is couched in words. And so the creativeness of word comes out as we use metaphor to describe, or also to transfer ideas, to define objects, and also extract the benefits or the characters or the meanings of those words. And if we see that in religion, we see that creation, it came about by words, creative words. They become a force in creation. And it is used also in this local realm, in the local parlance here, of Oweleshin or Roleshin. It's a word that describes what needs to be done, which you'll find in today's architectural briefs. Creation is a production of matter, usually coded in words. Through some linguistics and language, literature, and poetry, and even some mythological narratives, you see how words are used to describe, or used to convey, or even to illustrate ideas. And this are also it's also present in other religion. So it's not only in the Yoruba mythology that you see words being used. In the Christo-Judaic belief, it is believed that the words were framed by the word. And I'm convinced that the word is a vehicle for architectural design. It envelopes, it empowers the thoughts in picture, because we think in pictures. And metaphor is a means to an end. It is not just interplay of words. It's not just a spoken word. It carries meaning, it carries weight. And to bring it down home and to architecture where it's supposed to be, we see that metaphor is a juxtaposition. when you place two objects side by side, how do you want to extract the character, the positives in one object, and how is it mirrored in the other object for solutions for the essence and for the attributes that are useful for creation, for creativity or solution oriented processes. We see types of metaphor in linguistics. This study identified about 15 of them, but we will only be concerned with 4 because they are the ones that seem to have direct meaning in architecture. The conceptual, that is the kind of metaphor that describes the idea that one wants to use, either tangibly or intangibly. Does it have a sphere of influence in architecture? The root, there's a root metaphor. It creates the image of what needs to be done in the words that are comprises of that metaphor. The other ones are the visual metaphor. It's a representation of an image or a place or a thing or an idea. Visually, creating an image that a problem solver wants to use. Then the organizational metaphor. These are the kind of metaphor that are useful for architectural ordering. The ordering principles in architecture that helps us to organize and also put things in hierarchy. We will come from there. We can now see how metaphor can be used as a daily language in design. It's a carryover sometimes. Metaphor is a carryover, is a transfer of values or attributes, looking at objects through the merit of another. And we will practicalize that as we move on. So we can see that there are divisions of metaphor in idealism, in metaphor in education, metaphor in learning, in philosophies, in our traditions. You see metaphors and the roles that they play, so that, at the end of the day, we can see that the education and the philosophy reveals metaphor. The education of a people reveals their metaphor, and vice versa, as posited by Husserl and Heidegger. In this schematic, in this illustration, we can see that the practicality of life gives you orientation, and it is from that orientation that you gather experience. And when you have the experience that you need, you can exist and function well in the natural world of human interactions. But you can also use your experience in a particular way that impresses on your mind what you have gone through, and you form relationships in the humanistic societies that we have. These expressions, are interpreted by the mind in the 5 categories of sensories that we have, of touch, of feeling, of seeing, and all the likes. So putting these together, we can see that practicality leads to experience, and the experience that you have in mind or that you can feel with your senses can help you to appreciate metaphor. So I'm putting up a metaphor for you, for us to see how metaphor can be used in architecture. This is my own metaphor. The house is a tree. The house is a tree, is a metaphor. But factually, that is not true. It's a fallacy. And those are the mysteries about using metaphor. So if I come to the house and the tree, these are 2 objects that are not related, diametrically opposed to themselves in their nature, but we can extract the objects, we can extract the character, the attributes in one, and try to overlay it on the other, so that through design processes, through metaphoric design processes, we can extract the good attributes of a tree and overlay it on our design for a house. For example, the tree can grow. The tree can respond to natural stimuli. The tree is movable. It can move on its own. It can benefit the ecology. It can interact with the natural or exchange with the natural environment. But the house is a static, immobile, constructed, designed on natural and it cannot respond to stimuli unless there is an impetus that might even go to destroy it. So we can see that in the analogy, the good nature, the good attributes, the useful positives in the character or in describing the tree as an object, if we try to extract it and use it metaphorically in design, we can now start to design houses that can move. In this COVID time, we can now design houses that can breathe. We can design houses that can also respond to stimuli, to natural impetus, so that our houses are not as static as they used to be, because they have been designed, like a natural object, like a natural article, so that they can breathe, they can grow, they can expand, they can you can contract, and all those good attributes. That leads us to the examples of metaphor in our society. It leads us straight, because I want us to see how people in the past have used metaphor in designing. And the first example that comes to mind in the local realm here is the National Art Theatre in Gomu, Lagos. Is a symbol of military takeover of political power and the demonstration of such on the landscape. But the question is, who does the cap fit? Who does the cap fit? This is a military cap in a society that is ruled by the king, who is a pro-people, who is a people-oriented ruler. But because there's a takeover, we have a military cap as a symbol for a national icon, where people are meant to be forced to accept and see it as an object in the landscape. But unfortunately so, the example of the National Art Theatre was a copy from the Palace of Architecture, who is a Bulgarian, and more so the National Theatre itself was constructed and built by a Bulgarian contractor, without considering the emotive attachments of the people. No wonder how many decades down the line, 3, 4, 5 decades down the line, it becomes an isolated building in the landscape of Lagos, because there is no attachment to it. And we can see that metaphor that borrows from the object that people can relate to, when fused with architecture and when used as a concept to drive home a solution, becomes easier for the people to accept. And in a way, we can now affect the architecture of where we live when we use objects of culture, things that are present in our environment, and we use them in a metaphorical and in a creative way to express our language in architecture, so that we are able to deliver things that architectural products that people can relate to. And as such, we will also want to see architecture metaphor from the angle of sculpture. Michael Johnson is a sculptor, just like our own local Demas Woko. They've extracted architecture from sculpture, so that they merge art, architecture, and technology in a sustainable design. And there's an innovation in how they did it. We can see it from the Japanese metabolism, the metaphor of motion, where boxes begins to take leg, as it was also typified by Michael Jackson, who used it in this contemporary time. Box on 10 reels, boxes, as if they crawl. They have assumed a life of their own. But in the real sense, they are not so. The sculpture in Michael Jackson's work shows how he interplayed with the home icon, the house icon, and derived the context between the two by giving it a character that makes it look as if it can take a walk. Just like I said before, how can the metaphor, enable design to assume another dimension that will solve problem in a new way? Another example is the Dancing House of Prague. This was done by Frank Gehry. And from simple sketches of Fred and Ginger, two dancers that are popular at the time, he abstracted the dancing form, the dancing positions, or movement of two dancers, as it were. And he overlaid it in his construction or in the design of their house, so that you can see a metaphoric way. A house cannot move. Remember, I said it's a static object, but the way it was extracted can make it possible for us to see the motion in a static object as it is in this. And we see the graduation. We see how he moved from the first sketch of the dancers into making it in the static form that the house will assume. And we see the end product. They even went as far as to borrow from the yin and yang philosophy of the Chinese. This work was done by two architects from two different backgrounds. Vilado Milunic is a Czech architect, while Franco Gehry is a Canadian and American. And you know, when we see all of that, we can see how our culture connects to metaphors and how metaphors are used in interpreting or interrogating architecture. In the submission of Oluwole in 2017, he said something that is profound. No culture is perfect, and there is no absolutely good culture. The same way there is no absolutely good or bad culture. If we go from there, we can see the processes that we can use to extract metaphor and decompose it into design process that is useful for contemporary architecture nowadays. From identifying a particular object, we can see that this object becomes an object of interest for us, and we can begin to sift out all the things that are positive. There you extract the work, and you, in a way of processing, you synthesize all these values. It might be old, it might be from history, it might be from the present times, it might be a form of new or contemporary values. So in a way, we can see the negatives, we can see the positives, and how we value them and make sure that they are ready to be used to redefine or reconstructing new ideas, such that from there we can find a solution-oriented theory that is useful for us in design. Going to the local scene, we are all familiar with this, especially the Nigerian audience in this presentation. We know the Fila Abetiaja is a symbol of dignity, not just worn by anyone, and it's a symbol that shows that there is civility in the way we celebrate the local icons, so that we are able to see how it can be applied into architecture. We've seen this abstract from Ojo, one of the architecture students in the Department of Architecture, University of Lagos, and how he has used it to celebrate the icon of a Yoruba emblem, so that we see how he extracted the good things, the good attributes of the Fila Abetiaja, and he saw how he used it in a mimetic way to describe, the icon that people can recognize. We have also seen how this icon of culture, they are also present in other Nigerian geopolitical zones, like the Igbo chief cap is locally called the Okweze variant. It has many variants, which we can see. The high chief or the highly placed royalties are given feathers on their caps. But the ordinary citizens can use the cap in a way that they see when they need to attend important festivals, important occasions, and some other cultural events. We also saw in David Ajayi's example how he used the local Southwest Nigerian emblem in wrapping up the box that was that we now see as the Smithsonian Institute, Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. We've seen how the metaphor is also present in nature. It's in a biomimetic way, and what I call a bioarchitecture, where it was used as is used in the anthill. You know, we see how the, 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 the attributes of the anthill were used in constructing a self-cooling house by academic Pierce in Harare. He, he used that, it's like a borrow or a transfer of knowledge from nature and practicalized in the building, in the construction, and even in the functionality of the house. So it goes to say, as Kamaljeet Singh said, we think humans are the best designer, but this is not categorically true. We can learn from small ants. And this is also seen in the way the honeycomb was very, very close to how Kisho Kurokawa in the Japanese metabolic school extracted that character and overlaid it on a building that was done in the 1970 Expo exhibition that took place in Japan. So there are allegories, there are stories behind stories that can define architecture if it is used in objective ways, if it is used in a metaphoric way, so that we can see the stories behind our stories, the stories behind the local stories of pre-colonial architecture, of colonial architecture, and of these postmodern times. How do we marry the three so that we can use it to define where we are or where we have been coming from, where we are and where we want to go? History behind history helps us to see that there are some positives on those sides of history that we can use in a way that will be beneficial, to what is currently here. There will be a superimposition along the line. So we begin to see some lost traces that can be, that can be unveiled for us to move forward in new language of architecture. So uncovering local fading odes in architecture, we can see the allegories and they deconstruct them in poetry, because poetry itself has the element of ordering that is usually used in architecture. When we see poetry, there's a rhythm, there's a hierarchy, there's a language of poetry, there's repetition, and when you put all this together, there are ordering principles that can help us to redefine the architecture at the local setting, deconstructing the local aphorism of Ilelo Ogba Igbali. As it were, the house in its context, fits inside the fence, but it is not the other way around. And in this context, where is in a planetary system where there's a symbiotic connection between the two, as I said before. Going forward, we can even see in the local aphorisms of the search for COVID-19's solution present in the pre-colonial times. Hello? Can you hear me again? Hello? 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 Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the allegories, the stories behind the stories in architecture that can help metaphor. But sadly so, on the local scene, we have not seen the expression and the input that metaphor can give to identify or to give identity to the architecture of where we live. We see in architecture of where we live a mixed bag of, of the stories in Europe and the stories in the Mesoamerican architecture, all mixed up here. So the advocacy here is that using the local icons that are present in our local realm, we can redefine architecture through the metaphor that are already embedded in language, through the metaphor that language helps us to understand, and correct the notion that whatever comes from the foreign scene is superior to what architecture at the local realm is, and to the understanding of what architecture in the local realm is. We are able to see architecture in a new dimension when we see the valuables, the worth of the things in culture around us, in the houses, in the redefinition of the houses, the architecture of the houses, the residential architecture. How do we use the metaphor that is already in our language? How do we redefine them? How do we interrogate history? How do we interrogate or reinterpret the local poems, the local aphorisms, the Owe of the Yoruba language, so that at the end of the day, we are able to come out with a philosophy that can only be derived from the local culture, from the way of life of the people, as the early definitions that we put forward showed that thinking is a way of bringing out the best of the language, of bringing out the best of the culture in the way the people live, so that they can redefine today for tomorrow. So the questions are coming up. What are the meta architecture that we have? What are the stories behind the stories? How do we use our local icons in a way that redefine the sense of place, to give us a new sense of place, to give us the attachment that is needed in the architectural products that we have. So as has been done before in the previous lectures, we've seen it from the cultural perspective. We saw it from the landscape perspective. Now this is architectural perspective through metaphor. And as it has been done in the arts, the arts they've redefined Nigerian arts. The music industry have redefined Nigerian music. The textiles, they've redefined Nigerian styles in textile, in fashion. So as labels, the labels in architecture and the way it is to be redefined and reconfigured must redefine architecture in a way that it will become a new thing in the horizon, in a new thing in the landscape for the architecture of Nigeria, for the architecture of the Yoruba place, and by extension to the Nigerian nation. So architecture should not be seen as a cut and paste issue of of architecture of the Far East or the West or Europe. Architecture must be redefined in a way that will help us to sift out local valuables, the local worth in our architecture, and use that in a synthesis, whether metaphorically as a design solution, but using it as a way of redefining the local context for the local people, redefining today in a way that tomorrow we have an identity that is unique to the people. So I will be raising questions in your mind as we ramp up, that there is need. We need to look back to culture. We need to reinterrogate culture. We need to look at the oddities, the allegories in it. We need to look at the form, the art forms, the sculpture, the things that gives us our own unique identity. How do we superimpose that on our architecture so that it doesn't look anymore like borrowed or mirrored architecture of the external people? It is supposed to give us the identity that we need. So as we think about those uh, the objects that we can associate with, we need to see from the professional perspective in practice that we are able to extract the values in our culture and use it in creative ways to define and redefine our architecture of today for tomorrow in the place where we live. So I'm going to leave more areas to cover for our forthcoming panelists that are coming up tomorrow to shed more light on the issues of metaphor, the use of creative words in architecture. How do we look back while still moving forward? What do we have behind that is useful for us forward? So as we do that, I will plead with you to join us tomorrow again as we meet our next set of panelists so that they can throw more light on the issue of metaphor in local architecture. There are still more to do. And if there are questions, can you either send it to our emails, or you can send them now. I'm ready to take one or two questions and we can see how we deal with it. Thank you very much. Any question? Please let me see your hands if you have any question. Let's see your hands if you have any question. Hello, please ask a question. Can we? Hello, can you ask your question? Paula Adesomi, can you ask your question?
All right.
Sorry. I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. I seriously want to appreciate this. I want to appreciate you for this very educative presentation. It's well loaded. It actually shows a lot of effort that have gone into the presentation. So I just got the invitation today because I'm also in Germany. So when I saw everything about architecture and then metaphor, this and that, I got fascinated. Because when you are working in discourse, working in stylistics, you need them. So once again, I want to say thank you very much for the effort. Thank you for the energy. When you started your presentation, you mentioned an area that is not so clear to me. And if what I'm going to say now is actually what you said, I need clarification. I think I heard something like the post-independence Yoruba architecture is a mixed bag, so to say. Are you giving the impression that this architectural use of a metaphor is no longer in use now, it's no longer relevant now, or it is dying? If yes, what can we do? If this is not what you said, maybe you just give us a kind of clarification on what you mean by post-independence Yoruba architecture being a mixed bag. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. What I really was putting forward there is tracing the history of architecture and the way cultural influences from outside have shaped the way architecture is now. The pre-colonial architecture, the values thereof have been abandoned, and the superimposition of colonial values in architecture through the metaphors of people like Mr. Corbusier and the rest. And even other schools of thought in architecture from the Europeans in the late 19 in the late 19th centuries and the early 20th centuries. The superimposition of their metaphor affected local understanding, so that when it was independent time, the fusion or the transfer of knowledge affected the current crop of Nigerian architects, such that they only learned about European history of architecture, Western history of architecture. It was magnified such that local history of architecture was a kind of relegated to the background. So the product of the time of post-independent architecture in Nigeria has been a mixed bag. You find nowadays that the Internet of Things allow you to look at buildings in Europe, buildings in the Far East, and it has become a borrow and lending kind of architecture that we have in Nigeria, like I showed in the slide of the Bulgarian Palace of Sports and Culture and our own national theater. Those two emblems showed us that it is a short-lived kind of architecture. And that is why I describe it as a mixed bag. You find it here and there. You find that here and there in the architecture that we have now. So the advocacy is that we need to come to a point where the objects in our culture, and we can only develop ourselves by developing ourselves for ourselves. Any culture that waits for other culture to come and develop them is only not going to make much progress, which is what we've seen so far. So it is in drawing the analogy from history that I'm making that that allusion that we should learn to metaphorically use our culture to design for what we have now, so that we can have our own identity and not the borrowed ones that we are saddled with. Thank you very much. I hope I am able to deal with that question enough.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
That's okay.
Any other question? Can we take any other question before we postpone till tomorrow for our panelists to shed more light, to illuminate the topic from their own perspectives? Is there anyone who has another question? Thank you very much. Tomorrow is another day for more illumination on the topic, local metaphor in local architecture. And we have an array of scholars who are coming to throw more light on that. So from the Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub, University of Lagos, I want to appreciate you for joining us. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow at the same time. Thank you.